Hello, I am Maddie, as you guys already know, and I'm here today to discuss with you how I would change MITA if given the opportunity from 1875 to present day. So the main change that I would make is instead of having the composers grouped kind of by style or time period, I would actually make them chronological, just like how history played out. The reason for this is because when I was going through MITA for this past year, I would oftentimes get really confused on where we are in the whole grand scheme of things because, Smetana would be introduced, who was born, later, I believe later 1800s, and then 2 months later I'd be reading about somebody who I thought was a few decades after him, but was actually born in like almost the same year, and I would just kind of have to sit back and think about what is going on in this time period that made music like Smetana and made music like Foster. And it was kind of hard for me to put them all in the bigger picture because they were so spaced out, and I thought it would be easier if, you just placed each composer like they came. So, like I said, place them in chronological order. Instead of having chapters, we'd have sections, and each section is a composer, and it would go down the line. So the way we would introduce the style, specific events, time periods, is within each section. If, Smetana is the first composer within MITA to introduce nationalism in his music. So nationalism in Smetana section would be explained, and so the definition of nationalism, and then obviously we talk about how Smetana used it. And then later on down the line, when other Russian composers use nationalistic characteristics in their music as well, instead of having to explain nationalism again, we can just talk about how they use the characteristics. And so this is how it would play out. It would focus headlining with the composer, and then the information would be below. I'll mention quickly how each section would kind of be split up. You have the composer's name, obviously, their dates, their main style. Then you'd have their biography section, where they grew up, influencers, family life, specific events that were kind of big in their life. And then there would be a main piece. Sometimes we'll have a few pieces if it's a composer who had two very distinct styles. And then we'll have some analysis there, and obviously you can play the piece, which MITA already does have, where you can play the piece and follow the score, which I really liked, and this helped me keep track of where I am in the piece and see the notes while hearing the notes as well. We don't have much time, but I'll tell you a few of the pieces and composers that I added in. I kept most of the composers and works from MITA, but I deleted a few that I didn't find necessary, and I added in some who I think should definitely be in here that weren't included. So I'll try to go through this quickly. Maybe I'll mention a few of them. So first off, let's see. Joplin, I had to switch it to Maple Leaf Rag. I remember in M10, I knew ragtime after listening to this piece because it's depicted so well in this Maple Leaf Rag. So I switched out Joplin's pieces here just because for me personally, I really remember Maple Leaf Rag. I added in Eric Satie as a composer almost kind of because of personal preference. Also backtracking to M110 my freshman year, I remember his Gymnopédies piece, learning it in class, trying to play it on the piano even though I don't play the piano, and I really liked how the music affected me and made me want to kind of explore it on my own, and so I thought, why not incorporate this piece? If it had such a positive reaction with me, maybe it will do the same for other students, so I included that as well. This is kind of biased because I'm a tuba player, but I didn't see any tuba sections in MITA, so I thought, why not add one of the most famous tuba solos under Hindemith? It was the Tuba Sonata. I've played this piece. If you're a tuba performer, you've played this piece, so I thought it would be an interesting addition to give, we could use this opportunity to talk about the development of tuba as a solo instrument, because it was one of the later instruments that became soloistic. And let's scroll down because I don't have much time. Under Motown, I added Stevie Wonder and Superstition, The Temptations, My Girl. I took a class on Motown, so I just kind of thought of the first people who popped in my mind and looked into the music a little bit more. And I saw that in MITA, it talks about Motown, but doesn't really talk about the people who are under the label, so I included them as well. And last but not least, I added in the legendary John Williams and a movie music theme section, which I would include Jaws, one of his earlier works, and then Star Wars, his most popular, everyone knows it, as well. So that's for the repertoire and composers. And in these last few seconds, I'm just going to mention I also added a few features that I thought would really help MITA connect with the students more. One is a timeline that instead of listing each composer and their birth date, it is each composition. And so this places it in a timeline because obviously when a composer is born, they're not composing a piece immediately. Some start at 7 years old, some start at 50 years old. So this is kind of another way of getting everything in a line visually, and it's color-coded based off of certain styles. So you'll have a chronological timeline that you can kind of review at the end, look over, see, I don't really remember Molsigarski, I gotta go back and review him. So it's just a bigger timeline to help remember some of the pieces that maybe you learned earlier on in the quarter. You can see in my essay I did a little example one. And then lastly, a quiz section for listening would just help so much because in my studying, when I tried to quiz myself on the listening portion, I couldn't play a piece without clicking on it and reading the title. So I would have to wait for someone who was available to quiz me. So I thought of, a little quiz feature on MITA where you could plug in 1815 to 1975 if that was the period you were being tested on, and it would take all the music in MITA that falls under those dates, shuffle them up, and then it would play it for you without showing the name or anything. You could sit and you could think, okay, what piece is this? Composer, period, and then some facts about it, just like you would have to on the midterm or the final. That way you can sit here just with MITA and go through the music. And if, for some reason you can't remember some facts, you just push the space bar and it appears the name, the composer, the information that was missing. So this would be super helpful. It would have saved me a bunch of time when studying, and again, it's a great review tool. So I know this went over a little bit, but thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my opinion.